The most devastating response to an avoidant who has rejected, abandoned, or mistreated someone isn't anger, pursuit, or emotional pleading. It's complete and total indifference. Ignoring the avoidant strikes at the very core of their psychological structure in ways that no other response can match. While they expect and can handle emotional reactions, desperate attempts at reconnection, or even hostile anger, they have no defense against someone who genuinely stops caring about their existence entirely. This indifference becomes the ultimate revenge because it forces them to confront their own insignificance in someone else's life. The avoidant's entire ego structure is built on the belief that they are the prize in any relationship dynamic. They position themselves as the one being pursued, the one with options, the one who can take or leave any connection without consequence. Their psychological equilibrium depends on maintaining this sense of superiority and desirability. When someone responds to their rejection or mistreatment with complete indifference, it shatters this carefully constructed self-image and forces them to face the possibility that they aren't as special or irreplaceable as they believed. True indifference differs fundamentally from the silent treatment, passive aggression, or strategic withdrawal that many people employ when hurt by an avoidant. These responses still center the avoidant in the person's emotional world, even if negatively. Genuine indifference means the avoidant no longer occupies any significant mental or emotional space. They become irrelevant rather than important, forgettable rather than unforgettable, ordinary rather than special. This psychological relegation to insignificance attacks the foundation of their sense of self in ways they never anticipated. The power of ignoring an avoidant lies in how it contradicts every assumption they make about their impact on others. The avoidant expects their withdrawal to create longing, their rejection to cause pursuit, their emotional unavailability to increase their perceived value. They operate on the principle that scarcity creates desire, that their difficulty makes them more attractive, that their emotional distance makes others want to bridge that gap. Complete indifference reveals these assumptions to be false and exposes their strategies as ineffective manipulation rather than genuine desirability. When someone truly stops caring about an avoidant's approval, attention, or affection, it creates a psychological earthquake in the avoidance world. They suddenly realize that their power over this person has completely evaporated. Their withdrawal doesn't create longing anymore. It creates relief. Their mixed signals don't generate anxiety. They generate disinterest. Their emotional unavailability doesn't seem mysterious and attractive. It seems pathetic and unnecessary. This shift in perception destroys their sense of control and influence. The avoidant has spent years perfecting their ability to maintain others' interest while providing minimal emotional investment themselves. They've learned to give just enough attention to keep people hooked while withholding enough to maintain power and avoid vulnerability. When someone becomes genuinely indifferent to this dynamic, the avoidant loses all leverage. Their carefully calibrated emotional rationing becomes meaningless because the person no longer values what they're withholding. Genuine indifference manifests in specific behaviors that demonstrate the avoidant's complete irrelevance to the person's life and happiness. This includes not checking their social media, not asking mutual friends about them, not driving by places they might be, not crafting responses designed to get their attention. The indifferent person doesn't even think about the avoidant enough to deliberately avoid them. They simply live their life as if the avoidant never existed. This behavioral indifference extends to how the person responds. If the avoidant attempts to re-establish contact, the genuinely indifferent person doesn't get excited, angry, or emotional about hearing from the avoidant. They respond with the same energy they would give to a casual acquaintance or stranger, polite but disinterested, brief but not rude, acknowledging but not engaging. This lukewarm response is more devastating to the avoidant than passionate anger or obvious hurt would be. The psychology behind why indifference is so effective against avoidance relates to their fundamental need to feel special and significant, despite their claims of independence and self-sufficiency. The avoidant's entire relational strategy is designed to maintain a sense of superiority and importance in others' lives. They need to feel like the one who got away, the one who could have been perfect if only they were ready, the one whose absence leaves a permanent void. Indifference destroys this narrative completely. When someone becomes indifferent to an avoidant, it forces the avoidant to confront the possibility that their emotional unavailability and relationship difficulties aren't mysterious and attractive traits, but simply flaws that make them unsuitable for healthy relationships. The person who was once fascinated by their complexity now sees it as unnecessary drama. The person who once made excuses for their behavior now recognizes it as selfishness. This shift in perception is profoundly threatening to the avoidant's self-image. The avoidant also struggles with indifference because it represents the one response they haven't learned to manipulate or control. They know how to handle pursuit through withdrawal, how to manage anger through charm, how to deal with emotional demands through boundaries. But they have no strategy for dealing with someone who simply doesn't care anymore. Their entire toolkit of relational strategies becomes useless against genuine disinterest. Indifference also attacks the avoidant's unconscious fantasy that people will wait for them indefinitely while they work through their issues or explore other options. They operate on the assumption that their potential partners will remain available as backup options while they decide whether to commit. When someone becomes indifferent and moves on completely, it forces the avoidant to realize that they've lost access to that person permanently, which triggers profound regret and loss. The process of developing genuine indifference toward an avoidant requires moving through several psychological stages. Initially, most people experience anger, hurt, and desire for revenge after being mistreated by an avoidant. These emotions are natural and valid, but they still center the avoidant in the person's emotional world. True indifference only develops when someone processes these emotions completely and reaches a place where the avoidant simply doesn't matter anymore. This emotional evolution often involves recognizing that the avoidant's behavior revealed fundamental incompatibilities and character issues that make them unsuitable as a partner. The person begins to see the avoidant's rejection as a favor rather than a loss, their emotional unavailability as a red flag rather than a challenge, their mixed signals as disrespect rather than complexity. This reframing allows genuine indifference to develop naturally. Developing indifference also requires building a life so fulfilling and engaging that the avoidant's presence or absence becomes irrelevant. This means pursuing personal goals, developing meaningful relationships with emotionally available people, and creating experiences that provide genuine satisfaction and joy. The person who is thriving in their own life has little mental or emotional space left for caring about someone who treated them poorly. The timeline for developing genuine indifference varies greatly between individuals, but it typically requires complete cessation of contact with the avoidant and their social sphere. Continued exposure to information about the avoidant, even through social media or mutual friends, prevents the natural fading of emotional investment that allows indifference to develop. True indifference requires creating psychological distance that allows other priorities and relationships to take precedence. When genuine indifference is achieved, it often produces unexpected results in terms of the avoidant's behavior. Many avoidants who previously showed no interest in reconnection suddenly become curious about why their former partner no longer cares. They may reach out with increasing frequency or intensity, trying to re-establish their significance in the person's life. This pursuit often intensifies as they realize their former power over the person has completely disappeared. The avoidance response to genuine indifference often reveals the depth of their ego investment in being desired and pursued. They may become confused, frustrated, or even angry that their former partner has moved on so completely. They might attempt to create situations for accidental contact or use mutual friends to gauge the person's current feelings. These attempts at re-establishing relevance often become increasingly desperate as the indifference continues. However, the person who has achieved genuine indifference remains unmoved by these attempts at reconnection. They recognize the avoidant's sudden interest as ego-driven rather than genuine, as a desire to restore their sense of importance rather than authentic care or love. This recognition helps maintain the indifference, even when the avoidant increases their efforts to regain attention and significance. The revenge aspect of indifference lies not in deliberately trying to hurt the avoidant, but in the natural consequences of no longer caring about someone who expected to remain important forever. The avoidant's assumption that they would always occupy a special place in their former partner's heart is shattered when they realize they've become completely forgettable. This realization is more devastating than any deliberate act of revenge could be. The phrase "disdain things you cannot have" reflects the wisdom of recognizing that some people are simply not worth wanting. When someone consistently demonstrates their unsuitability through emotional unavailability, mixed signals, rejection, or mistreatment, the healthy response is to stop valuing what they offer. This doesn't mean pretending they never had attractive qualities, but recognizing that their negative traits outweigh any positive attributes they might possess. Disdaining things you cannot have also means recognizing that the avoidance unavailability is actually a gift rather than a loss. Their inability to provide emotional consistency, commitment, or genuine intimacy makes them unsuitable for healthy relationships, regardless of their other qualities. The person who develops this perspective stops seeing the avoidance rejection as missing out on something valuable and starts seeing it as avoiding something problematic. This disdain develops naturally when someone fully processes the experience of being involved with an avoidant. They recognize the anxiety, confusion, and emotional exhaustion that characterize the relationship. They remember the constant uncertainty, the walking on eggshells, the making excuses for poor treatment. When viewed objectively, the avoidance unavailability becomes a deal breaker rather than a challenge to overcome. The ultimate power of ignoring an avoidant lies in how it demonstrates complete emotional freedom from their influence. The person who can genuinely ignore someone who once held significant power over their emotions has achieved a level of psychological independence that threatens the avoidant's sense of importance and control. This independence becomes its own reward, regardless of how the avoidant responds to being ignored. Ignoring the avoidant also serves as a form of natural consequence for their behavior. People who consistently choose emotional unavailability, who reject genuine connection, who treat others poorly, naturally end up being ignored and forgotten by those they've mistreated. This isn't cruel punishment, but the inevitable result of their choices. They selected distance and independence, and they receive exactly what they chose. The person who ignores an avoidant after being mistreated also models healthy boundary setting and self-respect. They demonstrate that poor treatment results in loss of access, that emotional unavailability leads to genuine unavailability, that rejecting someone means losing them completely. This response teaches valuable lessons about the consequences of taking people for granted or treating relationships as disposable. Perhaps most importantly, ignoring an avoidant allows the person to redirect their emotional energy toward people and experiences that actually enhance their life. Instead of remaining stuck in patterns of pursuing unavailable people or trying to fix broken relationships, they can invest in connections that offer genuine reciprocity, growth, and satisfaction. This redirection of energy often leads to much healthier and more fulfilling relationships. The revenge of indifference is complete when the person realizes they no longer need revenge at all. They've moved so far beyond caring about the avoidant that even the satisfaction of knowing their indifference bothers the avoidant becomes irrelevant. They've achieved genuine freedom from the avoidant's influence and discovered that living well without them is the ultimate victory. In the end, ignoring an avoidant teaches both parties valuable lessons. The avoidant learns that their emotional unavailability has real consequences and that people won't wait indefinitely for them to become ready for genuine connection. The person doing the ignoring learns their own worth and develops the emotional strength to walk away from situations that don't serve them. This mutual education, while painful, ultimately benefits everyone involved by promoting healthier relationship dynamics and personal growth. The wisdom of disdaining things you cannot have extends far beyond romantic relationships into all areas of life. It represents the psychological maturity to recognize when continued investment in something unavailable or unhealthy is preventing engagement with better opportunities. Sometimes the greatest gift someone can give themselves is the ability to genuinely stop wanting what isn't good for them, and ignoring an avoidant often provides exactly this liberation.